I'll never forget the picture because it looked like a joke until it wasn't my dad in pajama pants and a tank top spatula in one hand, like a scepter standing between his smoker and a uniformed cop whose finger was pointed like a loaded accusation. And just behind him, the neighbor in a pink shirt, arms folded, wearing that little smirk people get when they think the rules are a weapon they alone know how to swing. Yeah, that happened. And if you've ever had a backyard that felt like a kingdom, you know exactly why that image still makes my blood run hot. Let me back up a sec. My dad, Earl, built his place on Hillworth Street by hand, framed it, floored it, trimmed it every board square, every hinge. True. And if the house was his castle, the backyard was his chapel, shaded by an old oak that should have had its own social security number, and tucked under that shade sat the throne, a heavy steel smoker he called Big Rosy Fat with hickory and memory. The kind of smoker that turns quiet men into poets because the timing is all heartbeat and patience. When smoke drifted over the fences, at dawn folks didn't need an invite. They knew there'd be ribs by sunset and peace in the middle. You know what I mean? Then the beige box went up next door. You've seen that kind of house, all gables and glass, like it got downloaded from a catalog. No soul, just square footage moving in with it came. Marla, self-appointed chair of the Hillworth Beautification Committee, which was basically a club of 3 who liked rules more than neighbors, and her husband. Officer Cole posture like a straight-edge eyes always scanning for infractions, real or imagined. They arrived like missionaries to a land nobody asked them to save, measuring grass blades and frowning at flower colors as if petunias could commit crimes. Marla started with friendly reminders, little notes on door handles about can placement and hedge height. Dad crumpled them because he wasn't messy. He was meticulous, and when the notes didn't work, Cole came with a tone. I've only ever heard from men who love the sound of their own authority, saying a survey proved our cedar fence was 6 inches on their land. My dad, who set that fence himself 30 years ago 2 inches inside our pen, out of courtesy, tapped the iron marker with a hoe and said, "The pin is the pin," then went back to his tomatoes. And that calm made them crazy, because people who need control cannot stand a man who won't bend. 1 week later, while Dad was out, a crew rolled in, pulled up his weathered cedar post by post like they were ripping out chapters of his life, and jammed a white vinyl wall a full foot into our yard. A shining plastic insult that stole the sun from his roses and dared us to say something. I watched him run his hand along that hollow fence, and his face did a slow slide from confusion to something heavier like grief with a heartbeat, and I thought, so this is how wars start now, with polite letters and stolen inches. You want to know the worst part? My dad's heart, which already had a zipper of scars from a triple bypass, doesn't do surprises well. We'd built a quiet life around that. Truth. Slow mornings, small projects, prayer in the shape of hickory, smoke. Stress was the enemy, the cardiologist had said. So when the campaign of legal paper cuts began, city complaints about hedge height unchanged for 2 decades, about an abandoned pickup that happened to be my immaculate '78 Ford. Visiting for the weekend, I watched his hand drift to his chest in those tiny pauses he thought no one saw, and I knew exactly what they were trying to do, make a good man lonely in his own backyard, until the for sale sign wrote his exit. I'm a lawyer by trade and a son by instinct, and those 2 things don't always agree. Dad was proud, said a man, handles his own business, so I waited, biting my tongue and stacking notes until the day of the ribs. The day that picture was taken, late July, sky like a blessing, smoke curling, just right. Big Rosie breathing in a low hickory whisper. My kids on the way, and Dad, so happy he told me I were maybe a touch more like a craftsman who can hear tenderness through steel. That's when the side gate creaked, and Cole marched in full uniform boots, biting the grass, and Marla slipped in behind him with her arms crossed, and her smile sharpened. "Sir, extinguish this fire immediately," Cole announced, and my dad blinked like a man who just got told gravity was illegal. "This is a barbecue," I said from the steps. "You can smell the ribs from 3 blocks," and Cole, eyes cold and bored, said we were violating the nuisance smoke ordinance subsection something, and if we didn't comply, he'd issue a citation and, if necessary, make an arrest. Arrest my 70-year-old father in pajama pants because his ribs offended a vinyl fence. You hear it and think parody, but I promise you, the air went tight around us, the way air goes before a storm. Dad took a half step to shield his smoker and said, steady as a level, "You don't come into my yard without a warrant," but I could hear the tremor that rides shotgun with adrenaline when your heart has known trouble. And that's when I stood, set my beer aside, and switched to my work voice. "Officer, my name is Jordan Hayes. I'm an attorney and you're out of lane," I told him low and even, walking him through the Fourth Amendment like a map, explaining how nuisance smoke doesn't cover residential grills, how exigency doesn't mean my wife called, and how he'd just violated 3 policies before his boots hit our grass. And for one clean second, I saw it, a falter in his eyes, because bullies know when they're on thin ice. Marla hissed, "Arrest him," like a stage whisper, and Cole tried to save face with an official warning spun on his heel. Gate slammed, and the silence after was a ringing thing. Then Dad swayed hand to chest, color gone, and the victory tasted like copper. Nitro pill under his tongue, slow breaths, the storm receding but not forgotten. "You handle it," he said finally, and that was blessing and order in one breath. I went to war, politely, preservation letters to the chief in internal affairs, to lock down body cam, dash cam, dispatch logs, texts, emails. The ordinance, which I printed and highlighted like homework, expressly exempted barbecue grills, which meant Cole didn't misread, he lied. I found 2 prior complaints for unprofessional conduct buried under union varnish, and I started walking Hillworth, not as a lawyer but a neighbor, and learned my father wasn't the first target. He was just the one who refused to fold. Mr. Whitaker, retired postal worker, had been bullied about his carved birdhouses. The Delgados painted over their son's mural after threats of fines. Tom and his husband Eli were told their flag was provocative and maybe the police couldn't ensure safety if it stayed. You hearing the pattern yet? Here's the twist that still makes me smile. The person who finally turned the key was our quiet neighbor 2 doors down. Ms. Patel, who used to be a fire captain, the kind of woman who has soot in her laugh. She walked into Dad's yard with a clipboard and a measuring wand, checked clearances, checked embers, checked everything, and signed a letter on retired official letterhead that Big Rosie was safer than most stovetops. If smoke could commit a crime, she said my engines would have retired decades ago, and gave me the best expert affidavit a man could ask for. We gathered in the Delgados' dining room and compared scars, then showed up to the council meeting 2 weeks later. With our Sunday voices, Dad went first, told them about building a life with his hands and watching it be measured by strangers with rulers and smirks. Mr. Whitaker followed, cradling one of his birdhouses like a grandbaby. Tom spoke with the kind of shaky courage that makes you stand straighter just hearing it. Then I stepped up and laid out the law in a calm, clean line, and at the end, put a brick on the table. Child Protective Services had called me 2 days prior off an anonymous tip claiming my kids were exposed to a violent grandfather and uncontrolled fires. And if you think I didn't convert my fear into a binder thick enough to stop a door you don't know, parents. CPS closed it unfounded on the spot, and the specifics in that report could only have come from someone peeking through a pink-shirted window. A room full of neighbors turned to face Marla without me lifting a finger. The paper ran the story the next morning. Cole was put on leave before lunch. The district attorney opened a malicious reporting case on Marla, and while lawyers negotiated, she pled to a misdemeanor, paid a fat fine, did community service, and left town with Cole in a hurry. The white vinyl wall came down under new owners who asked my dad where to buy good cedar because they wanted a fence that belonged. The committee dissolved with a letter that read like a middle school apology. And for a minute, Hillworth felt like it exhaled. We held a block barbecue after that, ribs and brisket and chicken kids chasing bubbles through hickory haze. Mr. Whitaker telling stories about winter mail routes. The Delgados unveiling a new mural that glowed like a heartbeat. Tom and Eli laughing by the coolers while Ms. Patel argued about the correct way to light a chimney. Dad caught my eye from across the yard, nodded once, and in our language that meant everything, meant thank you, and I love you, and we're okay. It was a cinematic ending, and if the credits rolled right there, nobody in that yard would have complained. But here's the part nobody likes to hear, because it doesn't fit in a neat box. 2 months later, a letter arrived from the city attorney about Cole's appeal wrapped in the language of the law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights. The kind of procedural shield that lets bad actors slip through on technicalities. And while we pushed back, we learned something uglier than a vinyl fence. A first responder legal defense fund underwriting. Cole's fight was bankrolled by Northgate Communities, the developer that built that beige box, and half a dozen more, the same corporation that had been buying up old Hillworth deeds for pennies on the dollar. And suddenly, the notes and the threats and the stupid ordinance weren't just two petty people being awful. They were strategy. Pressure cooked into policy, a slow boil meant to make original owners sell. When you follow smoke, sometimes you find fire, sometimes you find money. So here's where we landed. We got our win, loud and righteous, and yeah, it tasted like freedom, best rib you ever gnawed. And then the system reminded us it has gears we can't see. Contracts. We didn't sign money that moves in quiet rooms. Our answer wasn't despair, it was organization. The Hillworth crew became Hillworth United. We filed ethics complaints, pushed for ordinance reform, sat in budget meetings, until counselors learned our first names, and we began working to cap developer contributions to city funds, because if you starve the machine, it stops chewing my dad gardens more. Now moves slower, smiles easier, and the oak still throws its big gentle shade. Big Rosie still sings on Saturdays. Was justice served? Or did we just win a round in a longer fight? You tell me if a backyard can be a kingdom. What does that make a neighborhood, a city, a country, and how far should a community go to defend its smoke, its art, its flags, its stories? I've told you mine. Now I want yours. Drop your take in the comments who was right. What went wrong? What would you have done? And if you want more stories where ordinary folks push back and win, even if it's just for a Saturday, stick around and share this with someone who needs a reminder that bullies break when people stand together.